Okay, let's just jump right in. What does it actually take to save a species? I mean, really think about it. It's one of the biggest questions we face today. So in this explainer, we're going to open up the playbook for biodiversity conservation. We're talking about the incredible, sometimes surprising, strategies that are being used to protect the rich tapestry of life on our planet. And it's a massive question, isn't it? I mean, when you really stop and think about the sheer scale of life out there, from the tiniest, almost invisible insect to the biggest blue whale, the whole idea of protecting all of it can feel totally overwhelming. So, where do you even start? Well, the official definition actually gives us our first big clue. It's not about just, building a giant wall around nature and keeping people out. It's about management. That's the key word here. It's a proactive plan to make sure we can all benefit from the natural world right now, while also making darn sure it's still around for our kids and their kids and so on. Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we manage it all? Believe it or not, the entire global strategy really just boils down to two powerful core approaches. You can almost think of them like two different toolkits, right? Each one is designed for a very specific kind of job when it comes to saving life on Earth. And here they are. You've got in-situ, which basically just means on-site, and ex-situ, which means off-site. So in-situ, that's all about protecting species right where they belong, in their natural habitats. And this is so important because it lets them keep evolving and adapting. But ex-situ, that's like the emergency room. It's the critical safety net for species that are so close to the edge that they just might not make it in the wild anymore.
All right, let's dive into that first one. In-situ conservation. Think of this as our primary line of defense. The title here calls it the fortress strategy, and honestly, that's a perfect way to describe it. The whole idea is to build a kind of protective fortress around an entire ecosystem and defend everything inside it. Now, we've all heard the terms national park and wildlife sanctuary, and a lot of us probably use them interchangeably, but they're actually built on two pretty different philosophies. A national park is that total fortress we were just talking about. The entire ecosystem gets protected, and stuff like forestry or grazing is a strict no-go. A sanctuary, though, is often a bit more focused, maybe on one particular species, and it might allow local folks certain rights, which creates a more flexible, cooperative boundary between people and wildlife.
But that's the big challenge, isn't it? You can't just turn everywhere into a fortress. So what do? How do you protect nature in places where people actually live and need to make a living?
And this is where things get really clever. The solution is something called a Biosphere Reserve. It's just a genius, layered idea. So right at the heart of it, you've got the core zone. This is absolutely untouched, fully protected by law. Then, wrapped around that is the buffer zone. Here you can have some limited activities, like scientific research or some tourism. And then on the very outside, you have the transition zone. This is where conservationists and local communities actually team up to figure out sustainable ways to live and work. It's a fantastic model for how we can coexist.
And it's so important to remember that this stuff isn't just about governments and big organizations. For centuries, local communities have been doing this work. They've protected what are known as sacred groves. These are patches of forest that are preserved for deeply held cultural or religious reasons. And as this quote shows, their power is just incredible. They basically become these untouched natural labs, these living gene banks. And a lot of the time, they're the last, and I mean the last, refuge for species you literally can't find anywhere else on the planet. Okay, but what happens when a species is right on the edge? When it's on the absolute brink, and just protecting its home isn't going to be enough to save it? Well, that's when we have to deploy our second major strategy, ex-situ conservation. This is the ultimate lifeboat.
So, what does this lifeboat strategy actually involve? Well, it's about carefully taking threatened animals and plants out of their natural habitat and giving them super specialized care. You'll see this in modern zoological parks and botanical gardens. It happens through amazing captive breeding programs. We even have these incredible tools like seed banks and gene banks where we can freeze genetic material and keep it safe for decades. But, and this is the really important part, this isn't meant to be a one-way trip. The end game is almost always to reintroduce them back into the wild.
And the best part is, we know this can work. A fantastic success story is India's crocodile conservation project. Back in 1975, several species of crocodiles were just vanishing. So they started breeding them in captivity and then, very carefully, re-releasing them into protected rivers. And it worked. The program literally pulled them back from the brink. It's a perfect example of that lifeboat strategy in action, doing exactly what it was designed to do. But you can't have a success story like the crocodile rescue just happen in a vacuum, right? For any of this to work on a big, meaningful scale, all these conservation efforts need support. They need a powerful framework of laws and international agreements. You can think of it as the global rulebook that makes all this work possible in the first place.
If you look at India's legal journey, for example, you can see this really clear evolution in thinking over time. It all kicked off in 1972 with the huge Wildlife Protection Act, which was really about creating parks and sanctuaries. Then, in 1980, the Forest Conservation Act came along to tackle deforestation head-on. And by 2002, the thinking got way more sophisticated with the Biological Diversity Act. This one's about sustainable use and making sure benefits are shared fairly. You can see the whole journey there, from just protection to really intelligent management.
And then when you zoom out to the global stage, there are 3 organizations you absolutely need to know. First up is the IUCN. Think of them as the world's doctor for species. They're the ones who keep the famous Red List. That's the official scorecard that tells us which species are doing okay and which are in big trouble. Then you have CITES. They're like the global customs police for wildlife, regulating the international trade in endangered species to crack down on illegal trafficking. And finally, there's the CBD. This is the big one. It's a legally binding treaty where countries from all over the world actually sign on the dotted line and commit to conservation.
Okay, so we've got the strategies, we've got the laws, but that's all a bit abstract, right? What does this stuff actually look like on the ground, in the real world? Let's take a look at a few major projects that are making a real, tangible difference. And here are some of India's flagship programs. There's Project Tiger, which kicked off way back in 1973. It actually uses that same clever core buffer strategy we talked about earlier to protect its most famous predator. Then you have Project Elephant, which is cool because it's not just about the elephants themselves, but also about protecting the crucial corridors they need to migrate. And the Vulture conservation story is it's incredible. Scientists figured out that a single veterinary drug given to cattle was accidentally wiping out the entire vulture population. So what did they do? They banned that one drug. And just like that, they stopped the collapse and saved multiple species. It's just a perfect example of how targeted, science-based action can have a massive impact. And the ambition here isn't small. We're talking huge goals. India's national forest policy has set this really clear, really bold target. Bring the country's total forest cover up to 33% of the entire land area. And that's not just a random number. It's what's considered the minimum you need to maintain ecological balance for the whole nation. It is a massive, massive commitment.
So, as we wrap this all up, I want to leave you with this one big question to chew on. With all these incredible strategies we've talked about, from protected fortresses to high-tech gene banks, are we really succeeding in preserving wild, evolving nature? Or are we just becoming really good curators of a global museum? You know, a carefully managed but ultimately limited collection of what's left. It's probably the central tension in conservation today, and it's definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.